Thank you, Gary. Yeah. Thanks very much. It's great to be here. I'm happy to be here to talk to you. I want to say a couple things. I'm a composer and a fiddler, an electronic musician. I teach in the music department at Princeton. I don't really consider myself a researcher in computer music, more somebody who is a composer and a fiddler who's got a certain level of fluency with programming and signal processing and so on. So it's sort of part of my practice as a composer and as a fiddler to involve new technologies in various ways. So this talk I'm going to give today is actually a variant on a talk that I've been giving this year to some varied audiences. One was an integrated humanities PhD program audience, so non-musicians but very smart interdisciplinary thinkers. Another audience was a National Academy of Engineering meeting, and so again, non-specialists but very interested in various angles of this sort of work. I thought, for this specialist audience, it would be interesting to use that talk as a starting point. I'll sort of verge off from it, in part because I think these issues, that, for me anyhow, they remain of central interest, and relating some of these ideas that, that we work with in our specialist way to a broader audience, sort of part of what I do as a composer, and I think it's that challenge and those issues are interesting and relevant. So I hope you agree as we get into this. There are some things that might seem to an expert audience very low level to you, and I apologize, but hopefully it will be, as we get into it, useful to have gone over some things that may be obvious to you but wouldn't have been to a non-specialist audience. So I'd like to take you on a bit of a tour of some of the instruments that I've worked with over the years and explore how notions of mapping and mismapping through these instruments can play a central role in the creative process. And I'm going to use this notion of Scordatura as a starting point, a sort of primary concept. And so one of the interesting things about the notion of Scordatura, which is Italian for mistuning, is that it implies that there is in fact a correct standard tuning. So with the violin, of course, on the left there we've got the strings tuned symmetrically in fifths. And so what are the implications of having a standard like this? And I want to belabor this for a moment, okay? So here in Accordatura, normal tuning, we've got a consistent system with various types of representation that all sort of line up, where the written G immediately implies putting our second finger down on the E string, which generates the sound of the G. And depending on what kind of training you had, these things may be more or less automatic. So for some violinists, seeing the G, being able to sight read really well is something that happens quite easily. Whereas, for instance, some fiddlers or people who studied Suzuki, hearing that G immediately conjures that same physical response. And so we've got this consistent connection, this consistent system of different types of representations, physical responses, and sound. So this is one of the important things about this, is that this is hard-won knowledge, as anyone who's tried to learn to read music later in life, or even when you were learning as a kid. This is not something that you just sort of learn in an afternoon. It's something that is embodied and hard-won through years of training and thousands of hours of practicing. So then we go through this process of SINTONIZZARE, or what I call the tuning song. Bear with me, I actually brought my fiddle here today, and the reason I did that is that this is a huge part of my practice, this instrument, and I do a lot with Scordatura. And so I'm actually going to play the tuning song for you as I retune from standard, well, sort of standard, it's sort of out of tune, but so I'm going to bring the bottom strings up a whole step, and the top string down a minor third, so we have a nice big A major chord here. If you haven't done this before, this might seem really, for any violinists in the audience, this may seem really wild and perverse that you would do something like this. And I'll get to that in a moment. This tuning actually is, I wouldn't say common, but it's found in various places. In Norway, it's known as troll tuning, and it's often used in the middle of the night when the sun is just gone down and just about to come up a few moments later, and the fiddler might change into troll tuning in order to inspire the dancers to another round in the hope of getting them to the morning when the sun is fully up. In old-time fiddle music in America, in Appalachia, it's known as calico tuning, sometimes also known as drunken hiccups tuning, and I'm not sure why. Heinrich Bieber wrote a set of sonatas in the 18th century, the mystery sonatas, where each sonata was in a different Scordatura, a different tuning, and one of them is in this particular tuning, and that sonata is known as the 12-year-old Jesus, and so sometimes it's referred to as the 12-year-old Jesus tuning. All right, so what happens then when we do this? So we've messed things up. We've mistuned things, and this connection between body and sound and image is now broken. We see the G, we put down our second finger, and we get an E. Or we hear a G, we put down the second finger, and we get an E. Basically, things are not working the way they should. And this subverts our hard-earned embodied knowledge of what this representation means and how the instrument as a mapping device is intended to work. So the question then is, why would we do something like this? So there's a number of reasons why, and people have done it for centuries. One might simply be range. We want to increase the range of the instrument, allow us to play lower notes or higher notes. We might want to get a special resonance. In fact, let me get this actually in tune. I'll talk about this instrument in a moment, but one of the fiddlers that I worked with in Norway, he talked about how when your instrument is really in tune, all of a sudden it gets really big. It sounds really big. And so the sense of being able to find a tuning, an altered tuning, where that quality of resonance, that quality of bigness is really amplified, is another reason why we might do something like this. And then there's also just issues of projection. So for instance, in Mozart's Symphony Concertante for viola and violin, it's written in E flat, but the idea was written originally for the viola to be tuned up a half step and played as though it were in D. So you get lots of open strings, and the instrument is under higher tension, is better able to project and compete with the violin and project over an orchestra. So that's sort of a very practical reason why we might do something like this. In that case, of course, the relationship between the strings is the same, so it's not quite as perverse as some of the things that I'm showing you here. Some things are just impossible if you don't. For instance, there are various kinds of fingerings and patterns and sonorities that don't work well in standard tuning, but will in an altered tuning. And again, this is something that's happened over the centuries. So in the Bach cello suites, the fifth cello suite, he has the cellist tune the top string down a whole step, which affords various different kinds of double stops and fingering patterns that would be impossible or very difficult in standard tuning. And so just the simple fact that your fingers have a different relationship to the strings allows different kinds of music in a new tuning. And for me, even more so than all of this is this notion of these new tunings being a creative space. And so let me actually demonstrate a couple of those things if you'll indulge me. I have to play a little bit of fiddle every day, otherwise I start to get a twitch. And so I'm not going to have much of a chance today, so I'm going to play a little bit for you today just to demonstrate some of these things. So in this troll tuning in Norway, there are a bunch of actually bridal marches, which is a little bit scary to think about. Why would you play in troll tuning for bridal march? But anyhow. So that particular sound, gorgeous resonant sound, particular set of intervals that you get really quite easily by just sort of letting your fingers fall in very simple patterns, really is almost impossible in standard tuning. If I try to... I don't want to embarrass myself anymore, but you get the point. In standard tuning, that type of sound, those particular intervals, just... you're not going to do them. because they're really hard and awkward, and even more so, you're not likely to find them, and that's what I mean about a creative space. When you've got a tuning like this, you find things, particular sounds, particular intervals that you're simply not going to find in the standard tuning. Okay, so I said I had to play for you a little bit today. Thank you. So now I won't twitch for the rest of the day, I hope, or at least the rest of the morning. But that was in part also a demonstration. It's a tune that I wrote many years ago, actually, in this particular tuning. And first of all, it would be basically impossible to play in standard tuning, and there's no way I would have found those particular sonorities and those particular tunes without this tuning. So it's very much a creative space that has enabled me to find music that I simply wouldn't find otherwise. You may have noticed that my fiddle is a bit strange, so I'm just to take a quick aside, well, just to point out some things about this instrument. It's got lots of pegs up top, and you see 5 bowed strings, and then in addition, underneath, there's a set of sympathetic strings that run through the middle of the bridge and underneath the fingerboard, and then up to the top where I have all my pegs, and these are actually geared pegs, so inside of the shaft there's a set of gears that enable smooth and easy tuning. And I point this out because I actually wouldn't do nearly as much Scordatura if it weren't for these pegs, because I can do it very easily now. I can change tunings between tunes when I'm performing, for instance. And so the technology of these pegs actually affords a whole other sort of ambitious agenda in terms of writing music and performing music that would not be possible otherwise. So this instrument, which I've been calling the 5x5. It's the first of its kind, and it's built by a Norwegian maker, Solveig Hakkedal, and it's inspired by the Norwegian Hardanger fiddle, which I've played for many, many years. And the Hardanger fiddle has those sympathetic strings, sort of a built-in reverb unit with specially tuned modes, okay? That's a way that Perry Cook described the resonating strings to me many years ago. So I asked Solveig to build me a new instrument that had some of the magic of the Hardanger fiddle, had the quality of resonance, had the flatter bridge, but the Hardanger fiddle is actually tuned up like a whole step or a minor third higher than a regular violin, which just sounds beautiful, but it makes it just about impossible to play with fiddlers from anywhere else on the face of the planet. So this is built to be tuned at A440, and with the low 5th string, I want a 5th string so I can sort of play lines underneath when I'm playing with other fiddlers. And this is the instrument he came up with, and I will say without overstatement that it's changed my life. It's an instrument that I've been able to really do a lot of different kinds of music with that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. And I think one of the things about this is that for me, the instruments themselves are a subject of sort of study and research. I'm constantly fussing with them in order to afford new different types of creative possibilities. And so that's at play when I work with software instruments, but also with pieces of hardware like this. So, so that's the instrument. And one of the things I also want to mention about this instrument and also Scordatura in general, I didn't start playing this type of instrument until I was in my 20s. I grew up playing classical music, learned how to read music when I was 4, before I even learned how to read English. And what was striking for me is that using these new instruments and using different tunings was incredibly liberating, because I had this sort of embodied knowledge of how we represent things and what my fingers do on the instrument. And it was actually kind of a creative prison. I had no imagination in that space anymore. And so rebuilding the instrument so that it feels different under my hands in sort of subtle ways in terms of the resonance you get from it, but also in dramatic ways by retuning it, has proven to be something that's allowed me to sort of leverage the years of training that I had as a violinist and a fiddler, but not be imprisoned by sort of the standards of how that instrument is built and typically taught. So I will set this aside now and go on a little bit, and I want to now verge into some other things that use this notion of Scordatura as a starting point. And some of you will recognize this. So this notion of Scordatura can be extended in various ways and to other instruments. And so here we see John Cage's instructions for how to prepare the strings of a piano. And if you haven't ever done this, you need to see the strings of a piano with the various bolts and so on stuck between the strings. And this is basically a similar rewiring of a hard-earned embodied knowledge, where you play the instrument, and instead of getting a particular pitch out, you might get a clunk or a rattle or some different kind of sound. So it subverts this same relationship, and yet you can represent how you play this instrument in a conventional way. So this is one of the sonatas, and it looks like a very simple little tune with various pitches and so on, and yet when you hear it, this is what you get. Back to the knee again. R3. So again, a similar kind of rewiring or subversion that goes on. And for a pianist, when they first see this, if they sit down at a prepared piano and play and get these sounds out, it's kind of shocking, and you feel like you've done something wrong until you get used to it. But you're still able to leverage the years of training you have in your hands and in your eyes in terms of reading this sort of thing. I'm going to play you a short example from a different kind of prepared piano now. So this is a little instrument that I've been working on over the last couple years that I call the prepared digital piano. So what's going on here? This instrument has a set of preparations. Instead of screws and plastic and rubber between real strings, I've prepared the virtual strings with different kinds of simple algorithms that respond in different ways. So in this case, we have a number of things. We have a kind of pulsed metronome that begins when I release a set of keys. So And I've composed in that particular set of, you know, 4 16th notes with an accent on the first one. I could compose in any number of other type of preparations as well. But I could also have it start when I actually play the note. In fact, this came from an instrument that I've been working on before this. The idea was simply to be able to reset the phase of a metronome. And so that you have a metronome going, and instead of it always insistently demanding that you be in phase with it, you actually have the opportunity to get revenge and reset the phase of the metronome by simply playing a key or hitting a woodblock or something like that. So there's this synchronic component where there's these emergent and resettable metronomes where the phase is set with a key down or key up in this case. There's a nostalgic, I refer to as a nostalgic preparation, this sense of these backwards piano notes, being able to go backwards in time. And in this case, they're initiated by key ups. Let's see, just listen for them here. 2, 3, 4, 1. And they'll be, in this case, the length of how long I held the note. So 1, 2, that, okay? So that's one of the ways these preparations can be set up. Or I might set up the preparation so the reversed piano notes peak at the next metronome strike. So these preparations can be bound together in some way. And also there's some, as you've heard, some strange tunings going on here. So the keyboard will dynamically tune under your hands. I've got, at the moment, just 2 basic tunings in here that I use, a simple sort of just intonation tuning system, and then one that's based more on overtones with the 11th and 13th partials in particular being tuned a certain way. So, and these tunings can be composed into the instrument to change under your hands as you play. So this one of the interesting things about, for me, of this particular type of Scordatura is really fundamentally different than the previous ones I've shown you in that it actually maps things out into time in a way, whereas the other Scordatura sort of basically affected the way the instrument immediately responded when you put your hands on it. Here there are consequences in time that we have to wrestle with. We have to deal with issues of rhythm and meter and groove and so on. That said, these are actually very, very simple. I mean, there's nothing, in terms of technology here, these preparations are really, to me, they're sort of the digital analogs of sticking a screw between the strings. There's nothing particularly complicated about them, which I actually find very appealing about it. So I have to say, I found this such an inspiring creative space that I've composed nearly an hour's worth of etudes with various different types of preparations for this, that I'm working with a pianist now who's going to record them. And we're going to put out these etudes and then some little teachable pieces as well. The etudes are quite hard. They're also inspired by the Ligeti etudes, which, if you know them, are a bit of a handful. So we're going to publish the instrument and all this music sometime in the coming year. The point of all that is just to say that it's been really, really fun and inspiring as a composer to have this instrument that I can manipulate in this way. And part of that is that it's a familiar instrument, that it leverages things that we know well. And it subverts them in very simple ways that we can take control of and we can use in systematic ways to create new to make new creative spaces for trying to find new kinds of music. And so I very much impressed by the fact that these old instruments, we have a lot invested in them, and there are probably good reasons they are the way they are. And there's no reason in this day, when we have the options of building new instruments, to necessarily completely throw away everything that we have with these old instruments. No need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. That said, I've shown you these familiar instruments and shown how they've been mismapped in various ways. But what about something like this, which some of you, maybe you've all seen this, or maybe you have not seen this. This is sort of one of the interfaces of choice for laptop ensembles around the world. We call it the Tether. And I have one right here. Actually, I'm going to step out of this for a second in order to turn it on. Let's see here. Oh, actually, you know, maybe I'll even pull the interface out if I can. There we go. It sort of fits. Now I'm going to try to go, I guess I'll leave it that way for right now. So this instrument, this interface is radically different than what I've been showing you. This is not a musical instrument. This is not something that we've got years and actually centuries of sort of embodied knowledge, sort of committed, invested in that particular interface. It's something totally new. So what do we do with this? How can we turn this into a musical instrument? And I'm going to show you two different things that I've done with this. And the first one is very straight ahead, involving basically one-to-one mappings, where in right hand you put a particular sound, and in the other hand you put another sound, and you can pull through it. But basically, we have in each hand we've got three different streams of data coming in. One is this Z-axis. And I'm using it very straightforwardly to pull through the sound beginning to end. Totally simple. And also using the Y-axis to control volume. And then the X-axis here, this is the subtle one. It's doing a little spectral companding. So I can't remember exactly how I have it set up, but basically it allows you to subtly bring out noise or pitched aspects of the sound. In practice, I think when we play this, we aren't really thinking about that so much as just sort of intuitively playing the instrument and watching where we're going through the instrument. So that's a piano sample. In the left hand, I've got a fiddle sample, double stop, that I can pull through with one hand. Very, very simple, and actually quite wonderful. It's very useful in composition. You can replace those samples dynamically on the fly, and I've composed pieces where just simply by hitting a foot pedal, those samples will change, and the chords that the players are working with update and change. So let me play you a short excerpt from a piece that uses this particular instrument. Great. So this is a piece for so percussion that I wrote a couple years ago called Neither Anvil Nor Pulley. And this is a short excerpt where two of them are playing this instrument. Later, all four of them play it in a very sort of choreographic way. So we can listen to this. So this is totally scored out with a notation that I just made for this piece. So they're just reading along and trying to get particular tones based on looking at the instrument and moving accordingly. Okay, this is great. I like this instrument a lot, and I've used it in a number of pieces. It enables me to sort of have the players get their hands on these sounds in a way that's not quite the same as any other way that I know of, and so it offers some things compositionally that are otherwise not accessible. It's pretty simple, and you can imagine with this wonderful interface. I'm going to pull it down here, actually. It comes way, way out. It's not hard to imagine that there would be other ways of interfacing and building an instrument that would be sort of more gestural, more intuitive, less one-to-one in terms of the mappings. And so I want to show you a system by somebody that many of you will know called the Wekinator, which was built by Rebecca Febrink, who got her master's here at McGill some years ago, and then she came to Princeton and worked with Perry and me on her doctoral work, and she's now at Goldsmiths in London. And she built this system, it's basically a machine learning system for building mappings between body and sound, or not even just sound, really just building mappings in a very dynamic way, sort of making a novel use of machine learning that I have to say is very exciting. So let me describe the process. And maybe you've all seen this. Rebecca's probably been here. I don't know recently, but let me just go over it from my perspective, what I find so exciting about it. So here's how the process goes. So you imagine and create a sound world that you want to physically engage with. And normally this is some kind of parameterized sound world where you might have Chuck or Super Collider or max parameters changing over time in a particular way. And you sort of compose out this sound world that you want to be able to sort of perform and move with. And then you actually pretend to perform those sounds. So I might take the tether and move in the way that I would like to be able to interact with those particular types of sounds. I might repeat that a number of ways in order to give the system a bunch of examples to learn from. Rebecca calls this play-along learning. And then the Wekinator builds a map based on your examples, connecting the body to the sound, and then you get to explore this map, and this is so fun, this whole process. First of all, you can see, well, how well did it do reproducing what you actually taught it to do, and it may or may not have done a good job. But there's also going to be other gestures, sort of this infinite gesture space that you're in, that you can then try and see what the system does for you. So it invites a certain kind of play, a certain kind of exploration. That's very fun. I'll also say that it, in terms of building instruments, for me, this was a revelation. I've spent many, many years building mappings manually, sort of one-to-one or many-to-one, or however you want to do it, just sort of manually trying to imagine the best way to connect this parameter to that. And those of you who have done this, it's quite tedious and often not very intuitive. And this system made that process so fun because basically I was composing a sound world. I was dancing along with it. And then the system would make something, and I would explore that system, and then sort of get in this iterative process of trying teaching it with different examples and seeing what I get. So let me show you a particular instrument that I've used that does this with a tether, and it connects to a physical model that we call the blow-tar. This is another brainchild of, as I call him, the nutty Dr. Cook. So Perry Cook's idea for the blow-tar is that, well, the physical model for the electric guitar and the flute actually happen to be almost the same, which is kind of a strange thing. And so the blow-tar is a little MSP object that I made that basically puts those two models together. It has lots and lots of parameters in order to perform it, more than you can really think about. I think there are 13 or so. And so it's sort of an ideal candidate for this type of mapping. Let me actually open up that map and show it to you. This is a crazy system that uses multiple, uses Chuck and Java and Max all together. Let's see if I can, it's a bit of a Frankenstein. I'll pull one of these out here. This is just the Max object with the blow-tar in it. Let me set a pitch here, I guess. Oh, I'd have to turn it on, of course. This is important. I'm going to stop because I could do that all day. It's really fun. I remember when I made this instrument, I was putting it together for a particular piece I was writing, and I wanted to make an instrument where you could set a pitch and basically play with that pitch. You could do some bending around it. You could pull out some overtones. You could get you could sort of have it dissipate into noise, but then have it come back into more of a pitched-like sound. So I actually broke a sweat. I spent an entire afternoon giving examples of this thing and trying to teach it so that it felt like I could perform it the way I wanted, but it also had some spots that had some surprise in it. Like this moment, I'll show you. Right here, where it breaks out rhythmic noise. That was not something I had but I was delighted when I found it. And so everybody who plays this piece and uses this instrument regularly goes there and to other places that they find and actually like to work with. So sadly, I'm going to quit this and quit all of the things that it needed in order to run. I think I've got most of it there. Okay. So let me go back here. Okay. So now, when I see this $15 game controller, it looks entirely different to me than it did before when I first looked at it and had really no idea what we might do with it. And so it's again, through this type of both of these types of mapping, it's a place for discovery, it's a creative space, not so unlike a fiddle and cross tuning, where it's a place that you can push against, you can explore and see what you find. The mapping is not simple, but the process of making it is, and it's very intuitive, and so the connection, I think, between body and sound is transparent and it's repeatable. I prefer things that are repeatable, not random, just my own thing. So, so it might not be readable as a one-to-one type of mapping, but it is clearly something that's performable in a consistent way. I'm hesitant to say that this is somehow better than one-to-one mappings. I think they have their place. There are times to make very simple things and have simple and direct relationships. But boy, it's really exciting to be able to build instruments like this as well. But in this case, we've got nothing to build on or subvert, no hard-earned embodied knowledge to leverage. Rather than mistuning, we're simply trying to find a good tuning. So what now? For me, it is essential to make music with these, to compose with these, to improvise, and especially to make music with other people. And so this gets to the laptop orchestra, which has many purposes when we started it. Perry Cook and I started it back in 2005 at Princeton. And one of the purposes for me was for it to be a testing ground, a place to experiment with these instruments. And to see what kind of music I can make with them, but also what other people do with them, in particular the students that we have there at Princeton. And one of the things I found in the years since 2005 that I've been particularly inspired by is working in a laptop orchestra with instruments like these has really forced me to be more generous with my instrument building. Rather than making things that are just for me to play and that only I need to be able to find a way in, I've been making things that other people need to play and that I can compose for them and have them learn and try and actually ask them to practice to a certain degree, depending on the nature of the instrument. And in order to make a request like that, you sort of have to make sure the instrument is worthy, which is a question I'm going to get back to a little bit later. We started this in 2005. It's a curricular initiative, the students change every year, and which is fine, but it's a bit frustrating because it's very hard to build any continuity or have any sense that we can set the bar really high musically. So a few years ago, we started another group called Sideband, which is a professional spin-off of the laptop orchestra made up of well, now mostly past graduate students in our composition program, but also Rebecca Fiebrink is one of the members of Sideband. So these are people who are professional level musicians who have a lot of experience working with technology, or not necessarily. Some of them really don't have so much. And Sideband has been exciting because we've been able to perform pieces over and over and over again and really explore and see how far we can take these pieces, how high a level we can reach musically, and also sort of get a sense of what instruments and what approaches work better than others. In the next few months, we are going to be starting what we're calling the Sideband Chronicles, which will be a series of releases of recordings of videos and audio of pieces we've been making, along with software and instructions, should others be interested in taking them on. And one of those pieces, which I'd like to share with you now, because I think it's an interesting test bed and there's some interesting examples in here, is a piece that I wrote for Sideband called Four Squared for Liggity. Liggity is in the air today, which is great. And in this piece, I use a number of the instruments that I've talked about today and some others. So I'd like to play you a video of this piece. It's about 11 minutes long, and then discuss some of the issues we've faced and some of the decisions I've made and am continuing to make based on my experiences composing for and performing with these sorts of instruments. Excuse me. So just a quick little description. We have an actual old-fashioned real piano in the middle of things. This piece was written for Kathy Sepove, who's a wonderful pianist in New York. She's the soloist. It's sort of a micro-concerto. To the side of the piano, I call them the side pianos sometimes, I have two of these types of instruments that I described. In this case, they're simply metronomes going at a very fast tempo, 208 beats per minute, and the players are resetting the phase of those and the pitches of those. Surrounding them are some people playing the tether blowtar, and also people playing that phase vocoder instrument that I described with the piano, the first one-to-one map instrument that I showed you. And then there are also some people simply typing, playing a sort of percussion-like instrument, typing at the laptop. And I'm going to get back to that later as well. So that's basically what you'll see. And let me switch out of this so we can play this now. very dramatic pause there. So, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to get to a little bit of an existential creative question here, and quickly go over a couple things, and then I'll close. But I run into this question as a composer who happens to like to program. I run into the question of to code or not to code, and that is in part because the fiddle, this fiddle, and also this beautiful one here, is hanging right next to my desk as a constant temptation. And the possibility of diving into doing some more coding in the hope of finding something that's exciting and creatively inspiring versus simply picking up one of these instruments and playing them, it's often it's actually often not a very difficult choice. And more generally, the question of what Paul Ansky refers to as silicon versus carbon, whether to use digital instruments versus old-fashioned carbon-based acoustic instruments. And in part, this last question comes up like in a piece like that you just saw, and I'll go through that in a moment. But also, I had a conversation with David Lang not so long ago where he argued that if a musical role can be performed by an old-fashioned carbon-based instrument, it should be and should not be substituted for by a lesser silicon-based digital instrument just because you can. And I have to say, I agree with that, although it's an interesting question. It's not always so clear-cut. I'm running out of time a bit, so I don't want to belabor this, but let me just say that I have, since that recording, cut the typists and replaced them with real percussionists. I found that this typing instrument was kind of dorky. It's a network sync instrument, and the fact is that layer, that sort of percussive layer in that high mid-register, was much better executed with a couple very good percussionists playing teacups and little planks of wood. And we performed that just last month with the percussionists replacing the typists. Much, much better. On the other hand, the stretch pianists, as I call them, the ones who are they're sustaining the piano sound using that tether phase vocoder instrument, I've decided to keep them. I could imagine playing that part with, say, horns or clarinets or something like that, but there's all this microtuning that would be hard to do with the acoustic instruments. It happens very nicely with this instrument, and gesturally, it actually works beautifully. It's really quite fun to play. So the tether blowtars are irreplaceable. I have yet to find an acoustic instrument that could possibly replace the blowtar. And then there's the synchronic pianist, which you could imagine, we can replace all those metronomes with somebody actually playing those notes. And I've thought about that, but the fact is that I'm actually very interested in sort of pitting machine senses of time against human embodied senses of time. And so I like to retain that really metronomic quality of that instrument and really put it into this performance context and see how it shapes the performance and shapes how we feel time. So one of my questions is, I have to move on here, but so what is our bar for new instrument? This raises the question, what is our bar for new instrument design? Is it the fiddle on the wall? Well, the fiddle is actually maybe the wrong bar in terms of imagining building a wonderful new instrument. It's got a lot of richness built into it that might be not the right thing to aim for. The gong might be a really good thing to aim for. You think about the gong, it doesn't take 10,000 hours to learn how to play the gong, and it's a little bit like triggering an algorithm. You hit the thing, and then you simply take it in as it rings on in time, and it's not so different than triggering an algorithm and doesn't require, the so-called 10,000 hours. So there's a wide range of different kinds of, when we compare acoustic instruments with, silicon and carbon-based instruments, we need to think about what they are, and even the piano is really just sort of like a bunch of gongs, and so how those are configured, like they're just switches, how those are configured really teach us some important lessons about how we might build new instruments. So I'm going to close now yes, I'm interested in, I think I don't even need to re-say this because I've said it a bunch of times. I like creating, subverting old instruments and creating new ones, but I don't want to use old instruments inappropriately as models that sort of make us not want to ever do this ever again. And I like the idea of instrument building as sort of a dynamic compositional and performance practice where the instrument building sort of is really part of the creative practice and something that you see reflected in the music and the art that you make over time. And then and these basically all are about creating sort of embodied creative spaces that we can explore. And then one final closing thought. This is a quote from my colleague, the wonderful composer Steve Mackey. I refuse to accept any idea I can think of, which seems like sort of a preposterous statement. He's channeling Marx here, Groucho Marx, that is. I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member, and it's not so crazy as you might think. Basically, the idea is that rather than imagining that all of our music needs to come from between the temples, is that really the creative process is a holistic process that engages the entire being, our surroundings, our instruments, and the tools themselves in the creative process. So, thank you very much.